Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar Wednesday. We are so excited to have guest presenters with us today. We have CADCA Master Trainer Dylan Ellerbee, and then we also have Amy Luckiewicz, who is a DFC Director, and Dr. Patrick Daly, who is a Superintendent in the school district and works with Amy on their DFC grant. And so they're going to talk about school engagement today, and we're very excited to have them with us. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things before I turn it over to Amy and Dr. Daly and Dylan. We are recording, and the recording and slides will be posted to our CADCA Webinar Wednesday page later this week. So you'll be able to go back, view the recording, see the slides, share with your colleagues and anybody else who might be interested. There will be an evaluation that will go around, and then at the end of that, once you complete it, you'll be able to download a letter with your hours of participation if you need one. Those hours are only available for those who attend the webinar live, so please make sure that you download that certificate before you leave the evaluation page. We'll be answering questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to use that Q&A box down there at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. And then if you are dropping things in the chat box to share with everyone, please make sure that you select everyone so everyone around can see it. And then as you can see, we're so excited for our upcoming Mid-Year Training Institute coming up July 17th through the 21st, where we will be back in the House of Mouse down in Orlando at the Gaylord Palms. And so early bird rates are still open. Those don't close until June 13th. So you can visit cadca.org/MYTI 2022. You can see the link down there on the bottom, the web information. So you can go there and you can see more information about trainings once we release that training grid, networking, all sorts of things that we're excited to be back in person and training live with everyone. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our guests today. So Dylan.
All right, thank you, Brittany. Amy, if you can advance the next slide, great. So I'm gonna mostly step out of the way and let our two experts talk here about what they have been through in their community and what amazing things that they have achieved, but just a little bit of background. So I am one of CADCA's master trainers, as Brittany said, and have the opportunity to do National Coalition Academies. Would love to see in the chat box how many of you have been part of academies over the years. Amy is currently in her second academy and Patrick is in his first. Amy and their coalition are in year 6. So she did one in 2016. We just figured out, and is now doing another one. And they both were in my academy and are in my academy in Charlotte. And I was just kind of blown away that I've had over the years, I've had maybe one police chief. I've had, like a CEO of a local business, but I was blown away when Amy and Patrick introduced themselves and we had a superintendent of schools in the room. And so I had it on my radar. I need to talk to these guys about doing a webinar Wednesday, because this is super impressive that a superintendent of school has figured out a way to come to an academy and to prioritize this issue. And so really excited to have Amy and Dr. Patrick Daly here with us today to kind of talk about what their community partnership looks like and how you all can maybe replicate some of the things that they have done. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to you, Amy.
Thank you. Thanks, Dylan. Thanks, Brittany, for having us. And an unsolicited plug, if you have not attended National Coalition Academy, it'll change your coalition's functions. It'll change your mindset. You'll learn something new every day. And at the very least, you'll make friends for life. My first National Coalition Academy, we still lean on each other to this day. We have a Facebook group. We throw out ideas, we throw out questions, and it's especially helpful when you're reapplying for Drug-Free Communities Grant, when you're looking for a form. We call each other and say, hey, do you have that? So thanks again for having us. We're really thrilled to be here. My name is Amy Luckiewicz. The kids call me Amy Lucky. It's much easier, my long Polish last name. I've been a DFC director since 2016, but I've been working with kids for about 20 years. I worked for the YMCA for 10 years, and I was the town that I work at now in North Reading. I was the town's youth services director for a number of years. Interestingly for me is that I am actually located in a police department right now, which is part of why my background is a bunch of hearts. You don't want to see the background of the police department, but it's a very cool model. If you have any questions about that at the end, I'm happy to answer what it's like to be a DFC director as a civilian working in a police department, alongside with enforcement, treatment, and intervention. I am an instructor in several, as I say, asset building programs. We'll talk a little bit about a couple of those. My favorite part of my job is working with grade 5, upstream prevention, and leading guiding good choices. I love to travel and scuba dive. In particular, I love shark diving. And we are just north of Boston. And what you may not know is we're just entering our great white season here in the greater Boston area. In fact, our first great white sighting happened this morning. So I'm thrilled about that. I do travel for sharks. I just came back from Bimini where I got to do a great hammerhead dive. And it's wonderful. Love it. Wouldn't change a thing. Patrick?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Patrick Daly. I'm the superintendent. I had the pleasure of beginning right in January of 2020. And my joke is that I got 2 months in and I didn't have to call a snow day, which is a really big deal up here in the Northeast. And just as soon as that happened, I got my first phone call about this thing called COVID coming. So I joined at just the right time. But I've been in the district for about a little over 12 years. I started as a building-based assistant principal, kind of worked my way up into an assistant superintendent. And so I've worked here and in the town and with Amy for many years in her former role as well. She mentioned she was a youth services coordinator. So certainly I'm interested in policy, law, finance, and that was something that interested me. You know, I always get interested in what's happening in other states. And you know, one of the things that I was really excited about with CADCA and going to this program was to hear how these issues and also the solutions were manifesting across the country. And I definitely, you know, my favorite part of my job is getting into classrooms, seeing engaged kids. And my biggest takeaway from week 1 of the program was this idea of, you know, can you take a picture of it? I just wanted to share that out there. That this was really about how do you, you know, think about defining a problem. And, you know, part of what drew me into the work there was talking about logic models and developing strategies and solutions, and the idea of trying to identify a problem by something you can really describe vividly by taking a picture has helped me not only with this, but also with other work that I'm doing in education. So I wanted to share that with all of you.
All right, Brittany, if you can launch the poll, awesome. So if you all can, I think folks are pretty familiar with Zoom at this point. You should have a poll that popped up on your screen, and you get to select here from any of these options. What, if any, challenges do you experience currently or have you experienced in engaging your school sector? So data collection challenges, partnering on programs or speakers, partnering on tackling specific substances, none of the above, all of the above, or other. So we'll give it a 20-30 seconds. And Brittany, I think you can see as it's kind of coming in and when we're getting close.
We're at about 70%.
Awesome.
Okay.
Cool. All right, so we've got a sort of fair breakdown here. What really jumps out to me is 50% of you said all of the above. So you're having issues with data collection, partnering on programs and speakers, partnering on tackling specific substances, and then a number of you are dealing with those specific issues. I would love to see if anybody's up for it. Those folks who said other, if you can type those in the chat box so that we can kind of get an idea of what's going on and maybe include that in questions that we ask our panelists later on. But there is basically nobody who said they don't have challenges working with their school systems. So not to say that Amy and Dr. Daly don't have any challenges themselves. We'll talk in a minute about what challenges they have experienced. But this is, you know, time and time again, when I talk and listen to community groups working with their school systems is a real struggle for a lot of folks, and that's why I thought it was so important to bring these two on here and kind of describe what their processes look like and working through all of their challenges. But thank you for answering the poll, and we will keep this in mind, and please drop in the chat box those of you who said other or any other challenges that folks are experiencing. Go ahead, Amy.
So I'll just share a little bit about our schools. We have a beautiful new school. This is about 2014 is when this picture was taken. This is our middle high school. We're a small district, so I know this is going to sound very different than I know the structures of your school departments in different parts of the country, but we're a small district. Every town has a superintendent. And so I'm a superintendent of, I oversee 5 schools, a middle school, a high school, 3 elementary schools. We have about 2,400 students, about 450 staff. So probably pretty small, very small compared to some of your organizational structures. But that's how it looks in this part of, as Amy mentioned, just slightly north of Boston, suburb in Massachusetts. And, you know, we have been a good partner with the program since its inception. And the teachers and the staff, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but we have, you know, a lot of buy-in into these issues and interests from our staff members. And part of what we try to work on is to how to get them more involved in some of the subcommittee work. So
I think this is just the same poll, an accident there. Yeah, there we go. So Dylan asked us to start off a little bit about talking about our early on challenges. We like to call those the wonder years. So I want to talk a little bit about data collection for grant applications and compliance, which is something that we all are required to do for DFC, direct outreach to educators and to students, the concept of they're too young to know about substance use and drug use, and the question of, well, what problems going on in our town? What are we even talking about? So I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into those. And I know many of these challenges are not ours alone. They're shared certainly among my first cohort back from National Coalition Academy. These were some of the early challenges we faced. And honestly, looking back, they were mainly because we hadn't yet built the necessary relationships or the deeper relationships. But I'm happy to say we're able to overcome these. And we'll talk a little bit about how we did that later on with some lessons learned. So a little bit more specific. As you know, data collection is a vital part to our work. Not only does it help to establish baselines, but it's the key to proving that our work is valuable. And in our town, school data collection had always been maintained and managed internally with school staff. Allowing an outside partner like our coalition to come in was going to pose a culture shift. How would the surveys be administered? Who would pay for the data crunch? How is information going to be protected? How could families opt out? These were all initial concerns that we faced from our partnership. We also needed to build a relationship with stakeholders at the school. Of course, administrators are key stakeholders, but I'm talking about the target audience, educators and students. Previously, external information had been vetted by admin, and sometimes speakers were brought in through the parent associations. We wanted to really cut out the middle person and create a relationship directly with teachers, aides, janitors, counselors, and of course, the students without having to schedule appointments or meetings. I'm not talking about just walking into a classroom, interrupting a class and chatting with people. I'm talking about relationships where kids and adults alike could feel comfortable coming to me or our school resource officer, who is also on our coalition, and talk to us personally or ask about a resource or get a question answered. Relationship building couldn't happen if we didn't do the work and be present, and we'll talk a lot about that. Another key challenge lay in the concept of age-appropriate messaging in education. I'm sure this is not novel just for our location. School council and some administrators were concerned about introducing concepts of drug abuse to the younger grades. This was a perception problem and took many years of education and relationship building. I'm going to say relationship building a lot today. Mindset shift from they're too young to teach them while they're young was definitely a culture shift when you really think about it, and had to start with educating the administration on upstream prevention, primary prevention, and show the data that proves that it's the way to go. Without a doubt, I've saved the biggest challenge for last. Many of you are likely hit with statements of denial in many sectors that you work with. In North Reading in particular, we're known for our education system. There were concerns from higher up administrators and elected officials that if we talk about substance abuse, specifically related to kids, there will be a perception that there is a huge problem. Well, guess what? There was a problem, but we could talk about how proportionate it was. There were also feelings and many discussions that the schools were feeling targeted as if they were a festering source of drug use. For several years, in several planning meetings, I would intentionally say this is not a school problem. This is a community problem. And schools are just one sector that happen to have the biggest population of our target audience. I have to highlight that this took years of perception shifts at all levels, teachers to school committee, to students, and everybody in between to work through this challenge. So let's talk a little bit about our growing years. If you're DFC funded, you know that you need to collect core measurement data. Even if you're not DFC funded, I'm sure that you would agree that data is the center of our work as preventionists. So when we hit a roadblock in this area, we knew that we needed to put a lot of energy behind tackling data collection. How do we know that what we're doing is the right thing? First, we decided to reset. We re-met with the administrators, especially when Dr. Daly took over a few years ago, to explain the purpose of how the information was going to be used. Administrators and the school committee wanted to make some changes, and of course we complied. It just could not affect our core measurement questions that were required to present for DFC. Next, copies of surveys were available for parents to review, and we knew there would be questions. So we prepared the principals on how to respond to questions from parents. We also helped remove barriers by creating templates for feedback, a letter to the parents from the principals, an FAQ document, and scripts for teachers when administering the survey. This was key to gaining buy-in, and we also wanted to make the process as easy as possible for our schools. As an added bonus, it allowed for consistent responses to questions. Teachers didn't have to make up the answers, principals didn't have to make up the responses to parent questions, and it streamlined the whole process. Sharing data is a linchpin element in our growth. Here's an example. One of the key pieces of data we used to help move the needle on the what problem argument was this chart. It shows that the vast majority of substance use does, in fact, not happen in our schools. This eased a lot of the tension and concern about how schools may be blamed for drug use. We basically said, look, here's the data. We know it happens at school, but we also know it happens more outside of school. We're not blaming you, we need you, schools. By using key pieces of data to address specific concerns, it helped us move the needle forward. I will highlight and admit a little bit that this is kind of cherry picking. So if I had a question from a school administrator or a school committee member about a concern, I would skim through the data that supported our argument. But at the same time, it also is a little bit less overwhelming as if I were to show them the whole report. Another strategy we used was to offer data collection as a real opportunity for collaboration. We asked if there was any data that the school would like to track for their own initiatives. And yes, there was one. So Patrick's going to talk about that.
So we, and I'll speak to this a little bit later as well, but this idea of surveying, everything is data driven now, right? So we're just surveying so much. We're taking so much time to ask people questions about everything. So to try to work a little bit smarter on this and to say, we've already got a captive audience, we've already got students committing to this, let's collect some additional data. So we were researching sleep and stress levels of students, which eventually led to us implementing a later start time for our high school students as part of an overall health and wellness initiative. And so for several years, we included in the survey questions around sleep and stress. And that data has helped us to get to the place where we're able to implement a change. And this year we have similar questions because we are hoping to see the positive results of the later start time having a beneficial effect. We're not expecting it all to change overnight, obviously, but we're going to continue to use this tool. And I believe this was possible because we slightly changed the data collection method, Amy, to allow us to include a little bit of customization of some of the questions to address some of those issues that we identified earlier that we felt we didn't want to lead the question to make it appear that school was the target area of concern, and to have them be able to explain many different places where they may be using, but then also to incorporate new questions as well. So that really was a great resource for us, and we didn't have to do a separate survey on a different day. we have it all as a part of the same data collection, which is great.
So yes, I should have mentioned that. Thank you for reminding me. We do not use the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. We also don't use PRIDE. We use a Survey Monkey, and we send it to an external evaluator. It does have to be approved by CADCA, just like every other survey that you submit. And we do not alter the core measurement questions, but it allows us to add questions and have control. And like I said, we see it as an opportunity to collaborate with the school. So if the school needs a specific piece of data collected, we just add it in right along with our core measurement, reducing the amount of surveys the students have to take. So that's why we did that. I'm not advocating for YRBS or PRIDE. I'm just saying that's why we switched over.
And we differentiated maybe a little bit more with the high school, middle school questions as well.
Yes.
I think there was some concern there, and we did that as well.
Yes, thank you. So I just want to highlight the person standing next to me in this picture is Detective Lucci. He is the school resource officer, and if we were to add a third person into this presentation, it would certainly be him. He is a partner in everything we do with the schools. He's there every day, not just protecting student safety, but engaging with them. With the hopefully, if they ever need somebody to go to, they go to him. He loves for me to mention that he is a 2-time Trusted Adult Award winner elected by the students. So we're very proud of him for that. He also happens to work right down the hall from me, which is an added benefit of being a DFC director in a police department. So it's important that when you're talking to schools that you explain that your data collection, what it's being used for. Use your data to address the "they're too young" challenge by explaining upstream prevention. When you show that 6th graders from your school over time began to use vaping, it creates a strong case for upstream prevention. In an example, this is our Catch My Breath program. We wanted to bring program to the anti-vaping program to the elementary level, but hit some resistance as a few people thought the concept of vape use or substance use was too old for the elementary level, which for our school goes up to grade 5. However, when we demonstrated that the 6th graders had now started vaping and were ready with a science-backed vape education curriculum, the Catch My Breath, administrators and principals all agreed to let us start the program in grade 5. And I will tell you that we are reaping the benefits of this right now. As we've seen 5th graders engage with Detective Lucci more, they went home and talked to their parents about concepts related to vaping, but not just that. We also sent home education to the 5th grade parents around refusal skills, which has been the #1 thing that parents have given us feedback that they loved that we were able to start that at 5th grade.
Amy, if I could add, as soon as maybe it was the same day or the next day after the presentation, you were able to share with me some of the data and outcomes from the surveys, from the presentations, which was always helpful. Was that shared then with the building principals or just the school you're at? I forget how you shared that, but do you want to speak to that for a second?
Sure. So Catch My Breath is 4 sessions. So we did a pre and post test with interactive data collection methods with the kids. And I was able to share that in a report literally the same day or next day, as Dr. Daly mentioned. And it went to Dr. Daly, the school principals, and then if there were any key teachers that we had engaged, the 5th grade teachers, it went to them as well. And I think that real-time data was really beneficial for the teachers to understand that, yes, we're taking this very seriously and we're going to look at this over time. By the way, I should say too that we'll be very closely monitoring this current 5th grade class to watch their vaping numbers over the next several years, because this is the youngest they've ever gotten that education. Thank you. So risk factors, protective factors, assets, and ACEs are huge buzzwords. Another way we engage our school early on was to offer non-substance specific training and programs. Teaching things like online safety and digital leadership plays a role in prevention too, by addressing cyberbullying and raising awareness to unsafe online practices. One example of a non-substance specific program are the Search Institute's 40 developmental assets. In 2019, we began offering the 40 developmental assets to educators during professional development time. And Dr. Daly and I will talk more about that. Even if the educators were uninformed about substances or believed that there was no problem at all teachers, all administrators could get behind developing assets. It's a great soft opening to proposing more substance targeted training later on. Professional development for educators is both required in Massachusetts and expensive. Patrick will surely talk about that in just a second. We see our grant as a way to provide high quality training to teachers around topics that are important to the aims of the grant. We offer to present at professional development days and pay for all associated costs related to any training we provide, such as copying or any sort of materials. There's no additional cost to the school, and educators continuously rank these presentations as valuable and recommend them to their peers. Patrick, do you want to say more about professional development?
Sure. We've one of the goals when I was assistant superintendent was to have more choice-driven opportunities for teachers. So instead of that sort of, one-size-fits-all presentation, we may have, one larger presentation and then a lot of smaller choice-driven workshops. And so when we would build that schedule, we try to come up with, let's say 10 to 15 choices per, let's say we did A, B, C, blocks. And so being able to reach out to the coalition to offer an in plain sight or 40 assets, or we did some other similar ones through the police and fire department, in addition to instructional curriculum based programs. And we did sort of have a theme around health and safety and wellness for the whole day, but these were very popular, and people repeatedly say how helpful it is for them as educators, but also as individuals, right, with their own children or their own families. But certainly, learning that a student can be vaping for something that looks very much like a USB drive is eye-opening to a lot of our educators. Or a Coke can that's not really a Coke can. Those are huge eye-openers for our staff, and we get a lot of very positive feedback for that time well spent on those professional development days.
Thanks for mentioning that. If anybody has questions about In Plain Sight, I'll send up my information at the end of this presentation. We actually have one going on right downstairs right now in the police department all this week. And so I have detectives running that right now. So I have to add that when offering teacher programming around substances, it's important to show real data. By showing the educators that we collect and analyze data from the kids that they know, that they care about, that they see every day, they really seem to show more interest in emotional investment. When you show local data, these kids become more concrete and the problem is more close up and it's less abstract. Engagement and questions among teachers go up every time we show local data and real data related to the kids that they know. But not all engagement has to be directly with administration or even teachers. Another way that we moved forward was by offering to be a partner in providing free stuff to school organizations. We bought the school the Impaired Driver Program goggles for the health classes and funded the mock car crash with the SAD Club. We also paid or co-opted funding for speakers. Parent associations are always looking for financial help. By partnering with parent groups to fund enrichment or speakers, you really become an ally for their work and they become an advocate for you. Just a little bit more on partnerships. We all know that school club advisors and coaches really know their kids. Engage them by using your data to educate them on the need for small group education around substances. For example, School Resource Officer Lucci and I presented at the baseball team meeting around tobacco and vaping. After that presentation, the coaches asked us to speak at the mandatory parent meeting the next year. We found this to be a great opportunity. It also led us to the football team and some drama clubs. And so it was a really great way to have targeted audience in small groups with the engagement of coaches and advisors. So I'm going to pause there. Brittany, do we have any questions so far?
Yes. So Deanna had actually asked, did parents provide active consent for surveys? And if so, what was the process?
Sure. It was actually an opt-out. So they provide copies of the survey in advance for review, and they had I believe, Dr. Daly, a Google form to fill out to opt out.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah, we've paid a lot of attention to that. There's been an increased focus on all surveys, third-party surveys, and parental rights about opting out and reviewing that data. So we also take the additional step with all surveys to preview them at school committee. We put it on a school committee agenda so that they can be discussed publicly if people have questions at that time. And then from there, I send it out, or the principals send it out with a link to review the survey and then to opt out. And so we did we had more opt-outs this year than we have in the past. I think there's just an overall movement about, exercising parental rights to opt out of surveys.
Can I
That was a
follow up with a question there? Did you get any pushback? So a lot of communities, especially communities like yours that are very focused on education, parents that are hyper involved, have shifted to active consent, right? Where the parent has to say, yes, I want my kid to take this, otherwise they're not taking it. So have you gotten pushback, and has anyone been trying to do that in your community? Have you done anything kind of successfully to keep that movement at bay?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the whole thing is optional. So even though they opt out, the message that we say is that it's optional. So it's basically, the way we did it at middle school was, if the parents opted out, we tried to avoid them even getting the link, the actual survey link, and it wasn't required. So I think that method has avoided the opt-in pushback.
If I could add too that one of the ways that hasn't really explicitly been talked about, but one of the ways we kind of address that is related to the constant availability of opt-out. Even if a student starts the survey, they can start and stop at any time, and they can skip every question. The only question they're not able to skip is their grade. So that's really de-escalated any concerns. We also are very proactive in telling in the introduction letter what the data will be used for. That was a lesson we learned after our first year, that we really need to be explicit about why we're collecting this information.
Very good. So you've never gotten a parent saying, I never got those emails, I can't believe that my kid took this survey without my permission? You ever gotten that kind of?
Not yet, I will say, but we're certainly, like I said, we're getting an additional scrutiny on sort of everything we're doing right now. I think there's political pressure. I think it's also COVID, I think, made another window of transparency into what schools are doing.
Yeah.
So, and if that were to happen, then we would have more of an opt-in, but we do have some challenges just with even the scheduling of this work. And, when we take the survey, are we missing class time? Are we missing this? Or, so we've really tried to, we've done it loose, and our numbers have been decent. I think they've been harder at some grade levels than others. And so that's one of the challenges that Amy and I are continuing to work on, is how to make sure to, without requiring it in a class, how do we get the numbers and the return that we want?
Yeah, we're not perfect. This is something that we're going to continuously work on. For any DFC director or coordinator out there, I will just mention that I personally do appear at the school committee meeting during the review process, so that I can answer proactively any questions that they might have and not have to go through Dr. Daly or wait for an email to go back and forth. I appear. I also, and I think we might talk about this a little bit later, but we tell the school committee that they're going to get first shot at the data once it comes back. They get to review it before everybody else. They don't get to edit it. They aren't blindsided by anything that might show up.
Yeah, I think one of the kind of recurring themes here is relationships, right? And you have worked, Amy, so hard, and Dr. Daly too, in partnership, to think about how to gain credibility and appreciation from the community, that you have a situation where I think you have the benefit of the doubt, right? And you do such a good job with transparency that those things together, good, strong relationships with, your PTAs and other parent teacher type associations, as well as being very transparent. And, I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you try every avenue possible to make sure that the parents are seeing all of this information right around surveying, and that you're very open that we're absolutely fine if you need to opt out of this, that people aren't even coming upon the idea of, well, let's switch to an opt-in, because they feel like they have that choice and that option. So building those relationships and then making sure that you're super transparent, I think, are such really strong themes in what you two are doing, and benefits your work in so many different areas.
Thanks. The last thing I'll add about this is the level of detail associated with the presentation to the school committee. Dr. Daly mentioned that there's a concern about taking time out of the school classroom time to do the survey. One of the benefits of SurveyMonkey is that once you write it, it'll estimate the amount of time that it'll take, and it's pretty accurate. So this year, the high school level, the average amount of time it took to take the the question, I think 38 question survey was 10 minutes and the middle school took 11 minutes. So when it's that little amount of time, it's a much better, a bigger, easier ask.
I think that's really important too. I mean, we've all been there where the survey tells you it's going to be 10 minutes and then 30 minutes later, you're like, I can't believe I'm doing this thing, right? So yeah, all of that I think is really smart.
Thanks. And I think, Dylan, you're going to chat this one up.
We did actually quickly before we move on, one more question came through in the chat box.
Oh, sure.
Somebody asked, Devin asked, how much time do you spend in the schools daily, Amy? And if anyone besides Detective Lucy in your coalition is spending time in the schools?
Okay, great question. So unfortunately, this year, my chief was very restrictive about how much we could do to expose ourselves and our department to COVID. So if we were to go pre-COVID, I was there probably 3 to 4 days a week in some capacity. Not all day. Sometimes it would mean that I would hang out in the library during what's called power block or break period for the high school students. Sometimes it meant me attending a after school event, but quite often pre-COVID. I hope that next year we'll go back to that. Nobody besides Detective Lucci, unfortunately, is over there. So the only other person that would be our clinician, who is not DFC funded. I'll talk a little bit about her in a second. She is a full-time clinician in the police department, a civilian like me. She would come over with me a lot during COVID, but she got pregnant during COVID. So she was very restrictive in where she went as well. I hope that answers that.
Yeah, thanks, Amy.
Thanks.
Okay, so we started off talking about challenges, and then we shifted into some of the successes and partnerships that Amy and Dr. Daly and their community of North Reading have achieved. Would love to hear in the chat box, what are some of the ways that your school partnership has improved over the years, and things that were challenges that have maybe turned to strength. So would love to hear from folks in the chat box if you have any successes you want to share. We always love to hear this, and I encourage anybody else, maybe you aren't feeling like you have any right now, read the chat box, because this is really this is a place to learn and also to, I think, be energized by other people who are having successes. So I may not pronounce this correctly. Elaine, we've been invited to be part of the survey review committee, and the coalition has offered to do a year-to-year comparison since the survey provider has changed. Win-win for the school and the coalition. Awesome. I think that runs right in line with what Amy's been talking about. Make yourselves invaluable to the school. Offer value to the school, right? So you're becoming part of the survey review committee and helping the school out in any way that the school is sort of identifying that there is a need. Sort of stepping into that void and helping them, whether that's with funding or whether that's with, helping with personnel, whatever that looks like. Okay, well, please feel free to keep typing in the chat box. Tracy says schools have allowed, here we go, now they're coming in. Tracy says schools have allowed lunchtime access to students before programs begin to allow for relationship building and getting to know you. Excellent. That's one of the things that I hear most is that schools won't allow coalition personnel into the school. So breaking through that barrier, and obviously some of the relationship building stuff Amy has talked about is a good way to get there, is really important in building those relationships with students, teachers, SROs, all of those folks who are doing the good work. Lindsay says they're more open to us helping in school and distributing information now at events, proms, the challenges, scheduling assemblies and presentations into the school schedule. Yeah, school schedules are tight and packed. I'll put that on our list of questions to ask Amy and Dr. Daly at the end, how to fit that all in. Elaine says, again, also this year, the school offered a classroom for us to hold our youth partnership meetings. And awesome. Yeah, getting the school to offer space, resources, super helpful. Kristen says we've developed a great relationship with a substance use coordinator for our school system. She's helping us access to data and opening communication with SROs. So having, to me, Dr. Daly and their SRO are examples of folks who are in the school system who are helping with that kind of bridge between the coalition and the school system. Trying to spend time, and it doesn't always have to be a superintendent of schools, right? But trying to spend time figuring out who's that person going to be who's going to help us gain inroads to the school is really important, because you can have that ally on the inside who can kind of, tip you off. Hey, this is kind of what's going on right now. This is the resistance you're getting is because of this. Let's try to work through these things. All of that is super helpful. So I'm gonna, for the sake of time, I'm gonna stop there, but really appreciate, and please continue to type in the chat box if you have anything else. Thank you.
Yeah,
Right.
please, Dylan, if you could remind me to get back to that scheduling question. I think I'll explain how we manage that. All right, so I think we've covered how most programs we've offered at the schools have provided information and enhanced skills. So I just want to touch on a few of the other 7 strategies. We've partnered with the schools to change the town policy by creating a meaningful and robust social host bylaw. This bylaw incorporated feedback from school administrators, parents, and students. A bylaw reminder is shared during prom season and graduation through the schools, and we find that to be a good little reminder about hosting after prom and after graduation parties. Patrick, can you explain a little bit about SBIRT?
Sure. So SBIRT, it's a Massachusetts, I believe it's a Massachusetts initiative, stands for the Screening, Brief Intervention, or Referral to Treatment. It's been around since around 2016 is when we started. And so essentially our nurses, so there's no funding for it other than, using the resource of our school nurses, but they have conversations with students specifically around drug use. And the idea is that, and one of the controversial pieces of it is that parents are not involved in the process. And so students might identify and come forward with information about a problem, and then they are referred to treatment. And that treatment a step there may be working with Amy or working with our mental health coordinator from the town to get some additional steps. So it's not that parents are never in the process, but part of it by design is that, there are some kids that are hiding this from their families, and we're trying to just take a direct step. So this came out of, I believe, the governor's office a few years ago. So we've identified not huge numbers, but handfuls of students at the high school and middle school. I believe we do it at grades 7 and 9 right now to identify students that might need help. And so, everything's kept confidential for the student, and that's part of the incentive for them to be truthful and honest about the process.
So an example of the policy change related to SBIRT is we serve as the referral agency for the screeners. When our head of guidance, Mr. Rosa, needed to write a plan, so Massachusetts required every school to write a plan about if a kid screens in, or what are we going to do with the families? How are we going to refer them? And he immediately thought of our coalition. So written into the plan is that if somebody screens in, they get an immediate referral to our coalition, because we have our clinician on board. I mentioned her before. She's not DFC funded. She is a position that I wrote based on a need that I saw. So it was great that we had prevention and enforcement, but we were missing that treatment and intervention piece. So I wrote a job position, and she's now fully funded by the town in the police department. So now this model has, we call it the tripod model. If anybody comes up with a better name, please tell us, because we can't come up with one. But we now have prevention, treatment, intervention, and enforcement all in the same house. And so Laura, her name is Laura Miranda. She's a licensed mental health clinician, and she is the person that the schools go to if we have a person screening, or I should say she gets a referral. So a third strategy is supporting our youth action team. Most of you, I'm sure, have something similar. This group provides support by offering alternative activities, as well as partnering with the youth services program to offer mentoring. I should also add that our youth services director for the town, a town-funded position, is our current chair of our coalition. And lastly, we enhance skills of health educators by providing technical assistance. For example, we go and teach them how to instruct on alternative refusal skills that are not in the textbooks, also exit strategies. We do this by modeling in the classroom with the teachers, as well as providing handouts for them to then hand out to the parents. We've come up with some different strategies that are not in any health curriculum, and we love teaching them those. I will say Detective Lucci's a great actor. We actually model them out. He plays the role of a 13-year-old. Dr. Daly, how did you get so engaged?
Sure. So to be completely honest with this, one of the things that I looked at as I became superintendent right at the time of COVID was meetings I couldn't go to and things I couldn't do. And I felt like there were some times when I wasn't able to be as present physically or even mentally over the last 2 years. And I also looked at, I was going to a number of meetings related to our program that I said, I'm at all these meetings and I'm coming back and explaining it to other people. I get as many of the stakeholders involved as possible. So I believe, so I have my director of student services who oversees nursing, health, mental health. She now is the primary seat at every coalition meeting. And then I'm going to some of those meetings. I have my mental health person and some of my adjustment counselors now going to our regular mental health series. So I believe that the director of student services was the first person that Amy had invited to attend, and she wasn't able to go. And I kind of put it around to my whole team. And yeah, so one of the challenges obviously is just the time. And it really, for me, was just making this a priority. I wanted to send a clear message to our town and to our school system and our school committee that this work's very, very important. And so my having to, take a couple of days in March to leave and physically go to Charlotte was not easy by any means. I had to reschedule a school committee meeting, and at the time I was going to try to do it remote. And then by the time it came around, I said, nope, too many things going on. I need to move it. So none of this was easy, but like anything else, if you make it a priority, you can make that demonstration. For this next meeting in June, we were going back and forth. Again, graduation, end of year, very difficult time. I was able to work it out with the group that I would attend for just a couple of days. I'm getting a very late night flight after a school committee meeting, going down for a couple of days. I'm going to have to do a meeting or two remotely, but again, committing to this work and seeing it through. And I just thought that was really important. But there were some key takeaways. As I said before, the focus of this around logic models, we're working on our district strategy. And I always try to think, not only what can I get out of this and what can I contribute, but what can I take away and apply to all the work that I do. And I certainly had a lot of great takeaways, and it was worth my time and my experience to go down for a few days. So thank you for the invitation.
I'll just add that when I had asked Cynthia to attend and she couldn't, and I said, Patrick, can you maybe think of somebody else on your team that can take some time away? I never thought he would be able to do that. I never thought he'd be able to sneak away. I don't even think I asked him directly. He just said, well, is there any opposition to me going? And I, absolutely not. Please come. I just never thought he'd be able to find the time. So it was such a great surprise.
I got it. My wife has had a harder time trying to understand where I'm going for 3 nights. And so.
You'll have to show her this recording of this webinar.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what advice do you have?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think, this is a shot of a virtual meeting where when I came back, I believe from the presentation, I checked in and shared with everyone what we were doing. And, certainly everything coming from this group being research based, I think it helps. I think what we spoke to earlier, there's always a concern about scratching the surface and exposing something that may either be known or unknown, or we've already got so much on our plates. How do we get into these issues as well? And is it going to shine a light that if the data just gets out there, what are the schools doing? Why aren't they doing more? Why aren't they this? I think there's so much of a concern with that. By having everything tied to data, research based in science, I think that really helps drive that work. And then by thinking about what we can ask of the community, and these faces here represent, police department, youth services, community members, parents, school committee members, school employees, coming together and really focusing on some problems and making sure that, this group, when we come together to meet routinely, to identify, what some of the needs are in our community, making sure that we're not asking too much of anyone, but taking that, trying to come up with some manageable and measurable goals that can really advance some of our work, I think is so important. I think a question might have popped up. I don't know if I want to, I don't know if it's a question. So I'm going to just share a couple of my top 5 that I prepared here just to share out. So this first one was a takeaway that clicked for me. I've been working on my my entry plan and updating. We had two, NRPS 2016, then we had 2021. And when I came in, I was finishing out the last year of an old plan, trying to come up with a new plan. And with COVID, everything's been delayed. I've been given a little bit of a extension. I'm still finishing up my strategy. But it came to me, it's like, if we believe in this work and I'm coming up with our district strategy, why wouldn't we explicitly talk about some of our work around substance abuse and put it in there? And so, one of our big rocks now is equity. And we talked about health equity. And I said, why, I need to have health equity in my plan to reinforce. It's another example of the importance of equity. And it also cross-cuts some of the work we're doing. So we've worked that in. We've also worked in, explicitly the involvement of our schools' various positions on the various subcommittees, and with a goal of having more student involvement. So I think the second one might speak to this. I don't know how well coordinating our schedules. So, trying to get these meetings during the school day, during times when I can free up some of my counselors, teachers, and in a best case scenario, some of our students at times to participate and attend, because as we know, hearing directly from our youth is so important. And if we can coordinate that with, Amy had mentioned our power block period, which is sort of up against our lunches at the high school, and we're looking to introduce that to the middle school. It's an intervention block, but it's also a time when we can do some other activities and interactions. And if we can get kids freed up to Zoom in or to join a meeting. So I think the virtual aspects have also helped us with that coordination. But I don't know whether you've agreed that there's a difference this year, Amy, but I've seen a difference. It's not just one or two people going, but we've got several members consistently attending the subgroups for this meeting and also some of our other groups. So I think that's been helpful. The data collection process, as we talked about earlier, I think having coordinated efforts there, we're trying to think about this in terms of, everybody surveying all the time. So if we can have a few surveys throughout the year where we collect a lot of information instead of a lot of little surveys that people then are saying, I'm surveyed out, I'm not going to do it. So as I mentioned earlier, just to reiterate, having the ability to add a few questions to this survey and then trying to coordinate the ask of our staff and students to take a survey by combining the information we need, we found to be very helpful. So continue to work on that area, but that's something we're doing. The existing groups, I think part of what I think I saw a few of you add in the comments is about how much schools have on their plates, how much time, and we certainly do. But how much time and effort do we spend in parallel where, the coalition may be working on a goal and our health department or our phys ed teachers or our guidance counselors are working on goals, and we're not talking to each other, we're not coming together and brainstorming how can we work together. And so, we want our school resource officer more visible for good things, for prevention, for upstream. We don't always want the SRO involved when there's a crime or there's an incident. So coordinating with him, coordinating with Amy, coordinating with our mental health team to try to, utilize these existing groups. We were pretty proactive in our district to look at bullying, for example, years ago, and formed a coalition. So that group now coming together with, so we're sort of using our action team as an umbrella group at the district level that meets periodically and gets reports from all of the subgroups. So you're hearing all of the great work that's going on. And if something piques your interest and you want to get involved more, you can sign up for that group. But instead of having pockets and silos all across the community, really trying to coordinate that work so that we can help one another. I think that's been huge. Still more work to do there. And then again, the relationships and the visibility. So it certainly doesn't hurt that Amy and I have known each other very well. We worked a lot on that. I mentioned earlier the action team and the bullying prevention group that she was a part of as youth services, and that she continued to be a part of in her new roles. Building those relationships, having that visibility in the schools, and forming those partnerships so that the kids know us, the kids trust us, the teachers trust us. We're not just the people coming in to impose rules or, share data that might be imposing. I think having that visibility at the school committee meeting so the committee knows Amy, knows the work that she's doing, and there's a level of comfort that not being blindsided is such a huge deal. That idea of like, what's this data going to say, and how are people going to judge us based on the data? The more proactive we can be to say, hey, the data is out there, the truth is out there, right? The data is only going to help us get at the truth, and then we have to put our focus and efforts into the strategies for prevention, and that's really the ultimate goal, right? So working on those relationships with the political groups, the parents, and everybody is such a key. So those are things that, again, when I look at that first poll question, we are emerging here. We are not an exemplar. We just want to share what's working for us, and we have plenty of work to do as well.
So shifting perspectives, this is what I think every school should know about our work as preventionists. We work in upstream prevention. I can honestly say that I feel like Dr. Daly is an expert in what primary prevention is now. I can honestly say that I feel like several members of his key staff can speak to this and understand that working younger is better, and we need to continue to push education at a younger level, age appropriate, of course. Our work is science-based. Oftentimes we have people come into a school to say, hey, I want to bring this presenter in because I heard them and I like them. But do we even know that their message works? Do we know that their program has real results? Everything we do is science-based. Dr. Daly mentioned about the after action reports I would send after every class for Catch My Breath curriculum. Just the fact that we're collecting and taking snapshots is super important, and we're sharing it out. We're not keeping it to ourselves. Similarly, how do we use the data that we collect? It's not just to help the town apply for other grants or to have our DFC required reporting. It's to drive things like health curriculum. So if we're starting to see major trends shifting one way, maybe they want to increase their vaping class earlier in the semester versus later in the semester. Work within the frameworks, because the schools do have a very tight wiggle room when it comes to that. Help the schools know that we're a resource for private support, meaning that we are an additional support for their professional educators if they need mental health referrals or treatment prevention or treatment or intervention. We have had several educators come to Laura directly. Sometimes there's that stigma that still exists about going through your specific place of employment. We are outside of the school, and you can call us for anything. I have teachers that communicate with me through Facebook IMs, Snapchat, text messages, emails, all of the above. Dr. Daly mentioned this, but keep saying, like, we don't judge. The facts speak for themselves, and we're going to make decisions based on that and move forward. I don't want to talk too much about why you're at fault, or this is a school problem. As I mentioned, this is a community problem, and I love to say that publicly and privately in one-on-one conversations. So here are my top 5 tips to create a strong school partnership. Become a partner in their community. Show up for the games, the drama performances, and attend professional development days as a participant, if not an instructor. So sometimes if I have a detective teaching a class at professional development, I'll jump in on a class about math, just to show that I'm interested in becoming a part of their community. I've really found that talking in small groups allows people to express questions and concerns. Have lunch in the teacher's room. I enjoy doing that pre-COVID. I'm going to be getting back to that, and I look forward to that. One-on-one conversations and small group conversations are always best. Keep your ask of the school simple. I mentioned this before. If your goal is data collection, provide the school with all the necessary tools, including the technology, the scripts, and the sample administration plan. Make it as easy as possible for them to plug and play. This is related to that scheduling question that we had earlier, Dylan. When you remove all of the boundaries and make it plug and play, it really helps them say yes. Educators are required to prove that their class is tied to state framework. When introducing a new program or class, such as the Catch My Breath example, do your research and tie it to the state's framework. Include that in your presentation to the administration. So when you can tie what you're presenting to framework 2.40, for example, it makes it very hard for them to say no. My last tip is to recognize your education partners in big and small ways. perhaps a trusted adult award program that allows students to recognize teachers, or even highlight your school partnerships in a press release. I think that's going to pause us there. And Dylan, do we have any other questions come in?
Yeah, I don't see any in the Q&A. I have some that I wrote down. Brittany, have you seen any that we haven't gotten to?
I haven't seen any come through in the chat box except for people calling Dr. Daly a rarity and a diamond.
Diamond Daly, that's his new
Diamond Daly.
That's
I do
it.
want to mention one more thing about the scheduling, because that really was a huge thing. It's difficult to schedule your presenters to come into the schools. So if I can be honest, what I did is I allowed the parent associations to take the brunt of that. So they have the same goal as us of bringing in quality presenters. So now we've gotten into a relationship where they work with the principals on scheduling, because the principals want to work with the PAs more. And we basically either do the background information, send them suggestions, or pay for it, or co-op. So I'm being completely honest with, I don't do any program scheduling with the schools anymore. I partner with the PAs to do all the grunt work, and I give them the money.
Yeah.
It's a win-win. The goals are still met. High quality is still met. Our parent association still pays attention to quality, over quantity. And I'm really happy about that. And if that means bringing in one or two high quality, more expensive presenters, then they're going to turn to me even more and say, hey, can you help co-op?
I'll just add to that. It's been very helpful to have those offers and, and to kind of involve us in some of the planning and thinking. I think we've had some contributions from some of our leaders here on our PD days, on, those offers of how can I support you, as opposed to like, how can I get some time? And then I think because we're getting the support, I think we're more open to listening to ideas too. And then the other thing, very recently, Amy did sort of a lunch session, which was like an overview. And it was just a great, I use the term, I think, manageable chunk. Like I was able to sign up. I needed lunch anyway. I went over there. I was able to do it. And what was interesting, it was open up to multiple communities. And I actually, as a parent, engaged with some people. I live a few towns over, and there were people there that I'd never met with them in this context, but it was great. And, now I or others in the room might have the desire to go deeper into the deeper training, but it was a great, concise 35-minute or so training to get us in. So sometimes those real manageable chunks in the schedule can really, and you can learn quite a bit in a short amount of time. Whereas if it was a full 3-hour commitment, I wouldn't have gone and I'd know zero. I went for 30 minutes and I know, 20% of it, but we're in a much better place. So I think that's important strategy too.
That was a key strategy shift for us when reintroducing the developmental assets from 2019 back to now, relaunching it. Like you said, it was going to be a 3-hour commitment. We thought we would do a little workshop, including lunch that we got subsidized by another grant, and basically increased buy-in so that, okay, here's your taste of it. If you want more deep, we'll offer you a deeper dive later on, but now you've got a taste of it. And he became our biggest advocate for having other parents enroll.
Excellent. Let's see, we had another question in the chat box from Elaine. What was your most well-attended topic for staff and then also for parents? Great question.
Vape 101 for both answers. So taking it back to the basics, we do it as a myth-busting program. So what do you think? What do you know? So we start off with those questions. And, well, it's water. What's water vapor? What's the big deal? Well, it's not water vapor. It hasn't been water vapor for a number of years. And here's what it is instead. Without a question, Vape 101. Our biggest request, and I just had a meeting with Detective Lucci about this, parents want education on Snapchat. That's our #1 request. Our in plain sight is always eye-opening, but that's the next thing. And we're going to take the strategy that Dr. Daly referred to, and he's going to offer it as a small workshop. So instead of doing social media 101 for parents, we're going to do workshops. Snapchat 101, Instagram 101, that sort of thing.
Awesome.
You know what I should mention too is we've started doing something called Parent University here at the school too. And we're going to do this again in the fall. So we we just have on a Saturday morning or a weeknight, we're going to figure out the best time. And we offer some, windows into curriculum, but also I think certainly Amy would come in and offer a workshop for parents as a part of that larger event. So that's always well received.
We offer financial assistance to support that program through our grant. Again, we don't have to be the leader on it. We can be a partner.
Excellent.
We don't have to be the driver.
That it really highlights a couple of things that I think you've both been saying through the course of this presentation. One brings to mind a great quote from Harry Truman, "It doesn't matter. It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit." And was later has been used by many sort of political leaders throughout the course of U.S. history. And so if you're willing to hand something off to the Parent Teacher Association, and then they bring in this great speaker, and you're behind the curtains and you're actually paying the speaker, but you're totally fine with it because you're achieving the goal, as you said, that you wanted to achieve, which is you're getting that speaker in front of these young people, which is the end goal, right? That's the thing we want to do. And then that, as Dr. Daly, I think, said, that builds goodwill. And what does that goodwill translate into? We don't know, but we're going to cash it in at some point for something that's good for young people, right? And so the more that we can kind of build on those things over time, and the more that we recognize that our value to the community has to be bigger than just substance misuse, right? If we're just talking about the substance issue all the time, people are eventually going to tune us out, right? But if we're offering them, training on Snapchat or on, bullying issues or whatever, right? We're helping address some of these kind of tertiary things that are going on. That's really valuable, right? And then we have inroads and entree to start working and talking about, substance misuse issues that are tied to those and that go beyond those. So just wanted to highlight that that's just a really, really important part of, I think, the whole framework that you two employ in your community.
Do you want to throw up our contact info just while we have a few more minutes,
Yep.
just so people can write that down if they have questions that privately or want more program questions?
Teresa asks in the chat box, what are your youth vaping rates? You don't want to share now. You can send people to a website or whatever, but if you know it off the top of your head.
Give me 1 second. If you want to take another question, is it okay if I share that, Dr. Daly? Because you want to do the 20. Thank you. So we have not, it came in this morning. And so this is hot off the press. And like I said, I always give the schools first shot at it. So Dr. Daly's seen it, but the school committee hasn't, but I can read it to you. Give me 1 second if you want to take another question.
Just don't start emailing our community yet.
Yeah.
Right. Let's not take this.
Let me take this.
And we can see your screen, Amy.
Yeah, I'm going to change it.
Do or
There
don't
you go.
want us to. Okay, so I'm going to pull up another question. So we had a couple things when we were talking about challenges, and I asked people to write challenges in the chat box or to elaborate on their challenges. Samantha said, our school is open to working with us, but lacks the capacity. Employees have their hands full, especially over these last 2 years. I don't know, Dr. Daly, if you have sort of thoughts or ideas on how her community could maybe approach that issue.
Yeah, my thought would just be, I'm going to get a bulletin there. Try to see if there's ways you can help, and if you can identify common needs. And I think Amy's points about tying it into curriculum, tying it into common goals, and offering ways to help so that it doesn't feel like that one more thing, because it's so easy to feel like one more thing. But when we look at, say, we don't have, we're looking to increase our health education. We're very concerned around mental health. I mean, that was another takeaway I had from that week, was I've been so focused, and my team has been so focused on, we need to hire school adjustment counselors. We have mental health issues. The pandemic has caused all these issues. I didn't even connect the dots that, wow, maybe it's substance abuse related issue. And maybe during the pandemic, more kids were exposed to different things. And so how can we connect it back and try to say, this is such a huge focus for us, but how can we partner with the coalition to maybe simultaneously address some of those issues? So taking those time, and even just brief meetings, 15, 20-minute meetings, to brainstorm and say, what are some of the things that the schools are dealing with that we can help you with, as opposed to how do you take on something that we need you to take on. So
yeah, how can we help you, right? So going to the school and instead of asking them to do something for you, asking them, hey, we've got resources, what can we do for you? And it may feel like it's off topic or subject from what you're working on, but the idea there is that you're building that relationship, you're helping young people, and you're setting yourself up for maybe it's 6 months from now, a year from now, but getting that relationship to go to the next level and to work on substance misuse related issues. So I think that's really, really important.
So I'm going to show you a snapshot of the vaping if you're interested in that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Can you see that, Dylan?
Cannot see it yet.
Oh, okay. Sorry. There you go. How's
There
that?
you go.
Okay.
Yep.
So a little explanation. 2020, we did not collect information because nobody was in school. 2021, the 11th grade ended up opting out. So that's why you see the NA there. Anything in red has been a downward decline. Anything green is upward. Yellow is pretty much parallel to the previous year of 2021. Interestingly, we didn't give any education in any of our prevention programs to 6th and 7th graders from the previous year. So when they were grades 5 and 6. So that's very interesting to us. And by the way, if I showed you all the core measurement information related to all the substances, it's the same. 6th and 7th graders had an increase of use in all of the substances.
Great.
So we also do a comparison using monitoring the future study too, that if anybody's interested in that, you can go to our website, northreadingma.gov. I'll put it in the chat /CIT and click on data and you can see the previous results.
Also, I didn't know that you all collected data every year.
Oh, yes, I should have mentioned that.
That's a big deal. Most most communities, as you probably know, it's every other year. So that's a big lift, and that's impressive.
And the reason we do that, Dylan, honestly, is because it's tough to respond. You know, if we're collecting data every 2 years, we're behind the 8 ball already.
Yeah. We talk about that with logic modeling, that as you're collecting data and information, you want to do it often enough so that you're able to intervene. So yeah, if you can do a school survey every year, awesome. If not, my recommendation to folks is there's a lot of other ways to survey people, right? Whether that's adults or youth in your community. So you can, maybe you're not going to be as good as these guys with annual surveys, but you can augment or supplement through qualitative or community-based surveys that CADCA's got a ton of information on that. So feel free to go to our website to check that out. Let's see if we got any other questions. Alexandro says, you give us some hope that we can break the barrier to work with our schools, especially here in Florida, Miami-Dade, one of our larger school districts of our nation. Definitely be reaching out. Awesome. Dr. Daly's got only so much bandwidth, but I'm sure he's happy to help folks. One of the, and I'm not offering his services here, but one of the ways that I've been able to break through with chiefs of police, for example, is having a chief of police talk to another chief of police. A chief of police who's doing it wrong from my perspective, talk to one who's doing a really good job. So anyway, we don't want to inundate him, but he may be willing to chat with somebody in your community, because that really does make a difference. Or show them this webinar. I think that's super helpful too. This available to any of you all to share with folks.
You can reach out to me too if you have questions about engaging your police. I've learned a lot about police culture in the past 5 years working in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking at the, there was a theme there of schools being overwhelmed, and we can't ask them to do more. And so I think the point here is, well, let's ask them how we can help, right? How can we step in and help? And eventually that's going to come back. Obviously, it's great because we're helping them and we're helping the community. So regardless, it's a good thing, but it's also going to come back to you and the coalition in the long term. Who knows? Maybe you'll have a superintendent attend NCA one day. Yeah, I think that about does it for questions. Alexandra suggests maybe we can create a document why working with your local DFC has been a benefit. It's a good idea. We'll get our wheels turning on that. Yeah, I think that about does it for questions. Brittany, do you see anything that we might be missing?
I think there was one that we had pulled from the community. They were talking about creating MOUs for school-based curriculums, and just what are some of the key things to include if you're talking about an MOU that should be included from the coalition side, and then also from the school side, what both people would like to see.
I love that idea. We have an MOU between the police department and the schools. So it does make a lot of sense for us to create something between the coalition and the schools. We kind of talked a little bit offline about this, but some things that I would include in that is an example, for example, would be that anything we present to the schools would be science-based and tied to the state frameworks. And the second, kind of agreement that we could make would be that, again, we will offer opportunities for the schools to collect data as part of our survey collection, and we'll bear the brunt of any costs associated with that.
And for us to commit to some of the time and maybe space or resources or.
And we do use, school as part of our match. Dr. Daly's time is part of our match. I should mention that as part of the DFC match. Great idea.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen anything else come up in the Q&A box or in the chat box. So Amy, Dr. Daly, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule today to chat with us. Dylan, thank you for bringing them to us and for encouraging them to participate in this way. I do not have the evaluation link on me, so watch for that coming into your emails. And that is, again, as I mentioned, where you can also get the letter of participation. But I did put the link to where the recording and the slides will be posted, so that if you would like to share this webinar with a superintendent in your coalition, you can find the recording there. And so we will be taking a break from Webinar Wednesday in July, so you can join us all at midyear, but we will be back sometime in August, and we look forward to seeing you all then. Have a great Wednesday.